Well, welcome to Noel's World of Whiskey, and kind of excited here because tonight we are going to get into a 42-year-old Canadian Club whiskey. And this was one of my dad's favorites, and that's why I bought it. I was never a fan of Canadian Club. When I did drink rye when I was younger, I probably drank more Wisers, more Gibsons. We didn't have a lot of variety like we have today of rye whiskeys. Some of the whiskeys there we had were brutal, 5-star. These were not what I call classy whiskeys. A lot of these whiskeys might be something that you might get from a bootlegger after hours, but I'm going to say that Canadian Club, there was something, I think maybe it was too spicy, it was too sharp. The rye notes were just too strong for me, so I was never crazy about it. My dad really liked Canadian Club. And I was more of a Crown guy, because Crown's got a, in those days and that, and I think, some of the whiskeys that we look at with Crown today, they're a high percentage of corn, so. But anyways, back to Canadian Club. This was more, I purchased it as more of a tribute to my father and my mother that just passed away last year. And she was just short of 100 years of age. My dad died a lot younger. He was a Battle of Britain pilot. He was over there early in the war. One of those guys that has pilot's license. So he was a pretty valuable guy because, he was just a kid, but at the same time he had a pilot's license. So these kids were literally teaching other kids how to fly. And at that time, of course, the planes were not in the best of shape. They didn't have enough planes. They were kind of losing the war at that stage, and it was a real challenge for any young fella going over there to be able to deal with the trauma, the stress, especially a night fighter, But he did bring back, and he came back. I think that was the good thing. He did come back, and he brought back the culture of Great Britain and Scotland, and that his interest in Scotch. And of course, he never ever lost his interest in Canadian Club. So we were young. We used to sneak into his blended scotches, and I remember he always had Canadian Club. So when I saw this come up, the Chronicle series, and I saw it was within, it's a lot of money, but I saw, $286, and I think it went on sale for $268, if I remember rightly. So I bit the bullet. I said, I'm going to open up a bottle of this with my brother, and we're going to toast my dad and my mom. And so it sat around for about a year there, and my brother came down to visit, and we were at my daughter's place, and we ended up opening this up. I've got some pictures I'm going to show you. Me pouring a dram for him, and of course the bottle getting opened. I think it was a pretty special moment. But the interesting thing was, I don't normally drink more than maybe a couple of shots. Maybe 3, that's pushing it for me. That night I had 4 shots of this stuff, and I didn't even know I'd had one of them. So that might tell you something. But anyways, let's get into the review here. So we'll show you the bottle. And of course the color. And you can tell that by the light color there's no coloring added. And my understanding is this is non-chill filtered. Okay. And just something to mention about the box. This box is kind of a funny box. It's magnetic, And when you're picking it up, when you're picking this box up, be careful because this flips up. So if you're grabbing it like this, you could quite easily slip and this could fall, and you don't want to smash a 42-year-old bottle of whiskey, but pick it up sideways. I don't call it a smart design, but they did change when I got the 44. They have changed it, and it's no longer like this. So they just a poor design. Anyways, the whiskey is, I believe, 8.9% rye. Now, it is a very light whiskey. I'm going to see if I can get some legs on this so you can take a peek at it. So maybe a little too close there. You can see it's a lighter color. There's been no coloring added. Definitely Canadian oak and bourbon casks. They call this the Dockman, and it's a tribute to the guys working on the docks during Prohibition. And Canadian Club was the biggest selling whiskey out of Canada, and during the Prohibition, it made Hiram Walker a large amount of money. There was all sorts of stories that Hiram Walker had a pipeline under the river to Detroit from Walkerville, where this was distilled. I think it still is today. And my understanding was that the whiskey back in those days, Hiram Walker always was concerned about the casks and the quality. So Canadian whiskey was actually considered a very good whiskey, even back in the Prohibition times. Another little note that Hiram Walker eventually was bought up by Pernod Ricard, but the Canadian Club brand is owned by Suntory. So interesting that it is still distilled in Walkerville, of course named after Hiram Walker. He created that community. Anyways, to the nose. We're getting, right off the bat, I'm getting a little butterscotch. I'm getting wood. Caramel notes. And we're getting some of the grain. The corn. More of the wood. A little bit of the cinnamon. It has a relatively strong nose. I did read a few of the reviews, and it's interesting. One of the reviews said that it had a very light nose, and I'm finding a fairly strong nose. But we are getting a good mix of, I'm going to say, cereal notes, and we are getting back to the maybe the toffee, almost like a butterscotch toffee, and of course the wood. Okay, let's try the palate. Very sweet. More of a candy taste to it. I would say Macintosh toffee the wood's really coming through here. So again, we're getting almost like Cheerios. Again, that would be the cereal notes. The spice is definitely there. I'm going to say the cinnamon is going maybe the direction of nutmeg, maybe even to pepper. A bit of chocolate. Somewhere, medium dark chocolate. And we've got a slight bit of ginger. We're going to go for the finish. The finish. Good coating on the tongue. Now, this isn't the thickest drink, and most whiskeys aren't. Most Canadian whiskeys usually don't have a real heavy body like some of the scotches and cognac and some of the other liquors, European liquors and that. But it does have a heavier body than most of the ryes that I have drank. And the unusual thing about Canadian rye is that we can call a rye whiskey in Canada rye and not have any rye in it. It's Canadian law. And it's just because when you think of, in Canada, when you think of rye whiskey, you think of Canadian whiskey. And it's something that has been adopted. So we have some funny regulations. As far as the body is concerned, we'll say it's kind of let's call it a medium, a medium to light body. And as far as the color, light color. As far as the finish, I'm going to say a short, medium finish on it. And again, when I look at the legs, it tells me, for Canadian whiskey, it's got good legs. But if I was putting it next to, let's say, an Arbor Scotch, or maybe let's compare it to something a little more similar in age to this, like maybe an Old Perth and that. It's not going to have as heavy a body or thick a body as let's say an Arbor or an Old Perth. So that's something you learn about Canadian whiskeys. So, anyways, I'm going to add a little water, and let's see what a little water does. So I just added a few drops of water. I didn't get too carried away, and I'll say that it did bring out a lot more of the. It's almost, I'd say, the bourbon. There's bourbon casks. There's certainly the oak. You really can smell the cask. The sweetness. The toffee notes, and the cinnamon palate. Much sweeter, much dominating toffee notes. The cinnamon's still there. A little bit of the spice is still there. I'm going to say the hot cinnamon, maybe a little pepper. In the background, and getting a little more of that, it's almost a creamy texture, creamy chocolate texture. And this is with water. Good, nice coating on the tongue, almost a velvet coating to the tongue. Very, very smooth drink. There's no real sharp notes to this. Comparing it to other rye whiskeys, because, I'm thinking of a Lot 40. I'm thinking of some of the Wisers, the 15s or 18s. Pike Creek, 21. They're much spicier. Certainly the Pike Creek is a lot spicier. It's got sharper notes. What are we going to give this guy? This is your typical Canadian whiskey, and yet it's not your typical Canadian whiskey. It's 42 years old, but what I find with Canadian whiskeys is that they're not as complex as Scotch. I don't find them as complex as Scotch. I do find this interesting, and I do find that it is a whiskey that has it has layers to it. It does not have the layers that you're going to find, let's say, in an Aberlour. It's not going to have the layers you'll find in an Old Perth, or let's say Plain English. It's not Scotch, it's rye whiskey. And the fact that we know that there is a lot of corn in this rye, and it makes it a very palatable, very easy drink to sip. The aging just took all the sharp notes out of it, and it still has some nice spices to it. It's got those sweet notes. It's got the caramel and the toffee, and maybe even a little nougat. It's got some cream chocolate. It's got the wood. It's got some cereal notes. I mentioned the Cheerios. I mean, there's something here, but I think we have to compare rye whiskey to rye whiskey. And again, rye can be corn whiskey with a small percentage rye, as this is, but it's just not that simple. It's not just a corn whiskey, because it's taken 42 years in cask to produce this. So I say it's about an 87. That's where I put it. I would give it an 87 as a Canadian whiskey. This is a player. It's 42 years old. It's really hard to find a 42-year-old whiskey that you can afford. Most people spend a lifetime, drinking 10s and 12s, and maybe if they're lucky, they might get a 15 and maybe an 18. I've got a 42 here. I've got a 42-year-old here, and it's 200. I think I paid $268 for it. It was on sale. $268 for a 42-year-old whiskey. Where in the world can you get a 42-year-old whiskey for $268? Now, it's not going to stay that price, and that was a sale price. I think these are around $286. So in Canada, we are very fortunate that Canadian Club decided, they had these old casks, and they decided to release them in the Chronicles series. This one, the Dockman. There's various others. I do have the 44. I have tried the 41. I had a glass of the 41. This is a really nice whiskey. It again is something that you compare it to a Canadian whiskey. Don't compare it to a Scotch. It is a very easy sipper, and I think that if you had $268 or even $286 to spare, you would really like this whiskey. Having said that, it's a lot of money, and it's a question of whether you'll ever get another chance to purchase something like this, because I'm going to tell you, this is not going to stay that price. There's been a few reviewers, and these are the Scottish reviewers, that have already mentioned these whiskeys, and that they look at it as ridiculously low. They've tasted them, and they still think the price is ridiculously low, because when you look around, there's nothing close to it. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to ask you to drink wisely, drink intelligently, do not drink and drive, and until the next time, cheers.